Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Change the Air interview. My name is Kendra Seymour, and I'm beyond excited today to talk to our special guest, Dr. Jill Crista. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm so impressed with what you're doing. So this is really exciting to be part of it.
Oh, thank you. And I have followed you for years, and what you've done for the community has just been amazing. So for those listening, if you don't know who Dr. Jill Crista is, she's a pioneering naturopathic doctor, best-selling author, and devoted educator, and a creative innovator. Her superpower is making complex medical concepts simple and digestible to the average person. Now, Dr. Jill's passion is to elevate the well-being of the planet via the well-being of her inhabitants. And her book, memberships, online course, supports those wanting concrete steps to conquer health challenges. She focuses on conditions that are the cause, injury to the brain and nervous system, including mold, PANS and PANDAS, Lyme disease, and concussion. And I will say your superpower truly is making these complex things understandable for the average person, like myself. So it's a gift you have. It's amazing. And I love what you put out. I know we could spend forever talking, so I want to jump right into our questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so when we think about our home and water damage, when that happens, whether it's a leaky pipe or maybe windows that were installed improperly or one of the 100 places that water can impact our home, it really creates this complex ecosystem. And you can have everything from mold spores to fragments, in some cases mycotoxins, bacteria. So what are those things that make up a water damaged environment, and how do they make us sick?
Yeah, great question. We could talk all hour on that one.
And
Yeah.
that's IEP and naturopathic.
Yeah, right. So I think that's the thing, that the IEP world, or the environmental professional world, has not really been paying attention to mycotoxins, because their sole focus has been on spores and spore fragments, which is good. Those definitely have impacts on health. They can cause allergies, asthma, hypersensitive lungs, postnasal drip, sinusitis, all of these things that spores can do, and they're bad guys. They can also infect your body and cause true infectious aspergillosis and things like that, which are really serious conditions and need aggressive and literate, a pulmonologist who understands fungal problems of the lungs and can handle that. Pharmaceuticals typically as well. But there's all this other stuff that can happen in a water damaged space. And it depends if it's gray water or, like it has some bacteria already in the water, like a toilet leak, versus a clean water spill, like a sink leak, if something is dripping down below the sink into the cabinet below. Roof leaks, there's so many different types of leaks that can happen, and the kind of water will impact what decides to grow there. So when it's going to be more gray water, we're going to see also bacteria, which is now people are starting to finally talk about this, which is great. There's actinomycetes, they make a secondary metabolite just by living, they're just living and off-gassing, but it's an antibiotic. So you could be breathing the air and getting this antibiotic, not even taking the antibiotic, and get all the same side effects of having an antibiotic. You can also get bacteria that it's the cell wall of the bacteria, called endotoxins, that it's just when the bacteria dies that this breaks off into a little lipopolysaccharide, they call it LPS. This is something that can affect our guts and make your lungs more sensitive as well. Those are made just kind of part of normal everyday living of these different types of bacteria. And then there's the mold spores, and they make their own chemicals as part of their everyday living environment. And that's going to be things like alcohols. You can actually breathe moldy air and get drunk. A lot of people describe getting buzzed, that brain fog. It's kind of like you had a couple cocktails or something like that, and you're waiting every time you come in your house, you're like, what's I doing? And your eyes get affected and judgment gets affected, that kind of thing. It can also be aldehydes, which makes you very chemically sensitive to all the other things that contain aldehydes, which is a lot of our fragrances. So a lot of people will stop using fragrances, they'll stop burning candles, they'll stop doing a lot of those things because they're starting to get an overload of those chemicals. Another chemical of normally living mold is something called MPA, or mycophenolic acid. We use this in medicine as an immune suppressant drug. We use it because it so consistently suppresses the immune system. We use it very reliably for people who have had organ transplant so that they don't reject that foreign material. Well, why does mold make that? Well, if you're not going to reject a foreign material, then the mold can move into you easier. All right, so we have all of those things that can happen in a water damaged building. There's the actinomyces, antibacterial, there's the endotoxins, there's the mold farts, that are happening, the off-gassing of normal living, everyday living metabolic processes of these organisms. And then we have mycotoxins, and they get my attention because they're the only one that's made intentionally by the mold, and they're energetically expensive for mold to do this. So it will only make it when it's trying to intentionally harm another living thing. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. Intention is everything. So now we have these toxins that were made on purpose to kill the other microbes. We're not the target, but we get the same negative health effects. So that's what's going on in a water damaged building. There's also like little biting insects that like to feed off some of that stuff. So there's, we can really scare people. But there are certain things like that when we see it in an environment, it's like, ooh, there's mold in here somewhere. You just need to find it.
Yeah, it's definitely a clue. That's why I love, you kind of spoke to Brian Carr's analogy that mold is like a factory, right? And it's producing this pollution. And so even though you think, oh, it's behind the wall or I'm not disturbing it, that really does make its way into your breathing zone. And maybe we can talk about that a bit later. But one of the things that we see sometimes when it comes to mold is that people in the same family, in the same home are affected differently. Why is that?
Yes, genetics, a lot. And that's not necessarily the HLA genes, like the Dr. Shoemaker. I'm not Dr. Shoemaker trained. I was trained by naturopathic doctors. But it can tend to be more the things that help you process toxins. So that would be maybe if you have MTHFR, you can't process, you have methylation issues, or you have glucuronidation issues. And each mycotoxin kind of has its way that it gets processed out of the body. So it would be due to genetics, due to your nutritional status, due to previous exposures, and whether you're already colonized or sensitized to mold. So there are all of these factors. And then which type of mold, and are you the one next to the mold or in the room with the mold? So it's going to be dose, duration, type of mold, your own susceptibility. And we see this, it's more the rule than the exception that everyone in the family reacts differently. That's why it's getting missed.
Right. I mean, most people will say, sometimes it's a spouse who's maybe more skeptical. Well, if it were mold, we'd all be sick in the same way. And it just really doesn't work that way.
No.
I know in our own experience, I spent more time at home. I became a stay-at-home mom. My husband traveled, 90% of the year, just different amounts of exposure. And like you said, genetics and nutritional status and things like that.
The stress.
Right? How many of us heard, oh, well, maybe you're just stressed and you need to sleep more.
Yeah.
Sleep's important though. One of the things that I've heard you say, and I'm pro frog life here, but you talk about the cooking the frog analogy when it comes to living in a water damaged building. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, this was taught to me by Dr. Walter Carnian and Dr. Lynn Patrick. These are my environmental medicine instructors. This idea that if you add a frog to cold water, and I should do the smart frog first. Okay, so you want to boil a frog, which I would never do because I love them. But you take boiling water, just like pasta, right? You get a pot of boiling water and then you put the frog in there. Well, the frog senses immediately there's danger and hops out. But if you put the frog in cold water and you slowly turn up the heat, it will stay because it adapts. It continues its adaptation process to the new temperature. That happens with mold. So the way I described it was when mold happened in our own family, even though I was treating mold sick people, even though this was like my practice focus, I completely missed it because I was the frog. We were continuously adapting to our new home. As we closed up windows for winter, we got a little more dose, a little more dose, a little more dose until we were all sick by the middle of winter because we were stuck in this indoor environment. Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah. And I think that's another reason too, probably why it's missed. It's not so obvious, right? For some people, it's not like the day you move in, you start experiencing symptoms. Although for some of our sensitized individuals that, they can pick up on things like that. I once had a
Mhm.
practitioner explain to me that our journey would be a bit like peeling an onion. We would pull back layers and we would uncover more and more things. So like Lyme, co-infections, EBV, a host of other things. I feel like when mold is on the scene, it's like throwing a party and everybody's invited. So what's going on
Description.
with this? Why does it seem like all these players come to play at the same time when mold's
Yeah, peeling the onion is sort of how we heal. We heal in reverse order of how we took on things. So no matter what the morbid influence is, it could create the same symptom. So let's go back to the sleep situation. Let's say, during high school or college, you were involved in a lot of activities, you had a lot going on, and you didn't sleep very much. And then you got mono, and then your body couldn't completely kick it out. That same thing can happen if you've been exposed to mold later in life. It's different morbid influences, as we would in naturopathic medicine, we use all these old-fashioned terms, but it's very helpful for me because it kind of describes this, like, here's something that's impacting your health negatively. And mold, the way that it does it, it reduces your own innate immune system. So anything that was brewing that your immune system kind of sort of took care of good enough for you to just kind of keep going on in life, maybe you need a little more caffeine, maybe you need a little more sugar or whatever it is to keep going, it's going to just take the lid off that and it's going to aggravate that. And so as we heal and we peel that onion, what we're really doing is taking away morbid influences so that we can find these nuggets that your body has been exposed to. And we find that mold is kind of the gift for a lot of people in the end, because they start taking care of their health. They uncover these things that would have bit them in the butt later and do it while you're, younger and healthier and maybe haven't gotten a scary diagnosis of dementia or cancer or something like that, or an autoimmune disease. So a lot of times mold is actually going to be the best gift in the end, because you realize, oh my gosh, I had chronic Lyme. Oh my gosh, I had Bartonella. Oh my gosh, I had EBV. When was this going to show up? And EBV is a cause for a multitude of cancers and autoimmune diseases such as MS.
Right.
So this mold event could have been the thing that woke you up to start paying attention to those underlying things so that you don't have to deal with that later in your life. And I know I say that now, being many, many years away from it personally, but I see it in my patients all the time that they come back and they say, that was horrible. I never would have wished that on anyone ever. But if that's what it took to get us as a family to turn it around, start trusting our bodies, start eating better, getting to sleep, getting outdoor time, all of the things, getting a healthier home, chemical-free home. We needed that wake-up call. It could be gentler. So I'm just telling everybody it doesn't have to be hard. And the better you listen to whispers, the less hard it is.
I mean, I know for us, I look back, our journey was long and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And it's part of the reason why I co-founded Change the Air Foundation. But we live so much more consciously and we make better choices in our food and our water and our building materials and what we expose ourselves to. And so at the end of the day, I am grateful for that, because while ignorance is bliss, there's some reassurance that comes with that knowledge. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah. Now my heart hope is that those people who don't have the option to make all of those changes because they are in rental situations, they're in low income situations, those are the people that you and I are out here doing this for.
Yep, absolutely. Now I've heard you say that mold related illness needs a new name. What do you mean by that?
It needs a definition upgrade. If you look on the CDC's website, they define mold illness as basically what I kind of coin it as spore illness. This is going to be things that have to do with interaction with the spores. And this is leading the entire environmental professional side of things, which is it's all about spores. We don't pay attention to the chemicals. We don't pay attention to actinomycetes. We don't pay attention to mycotoxins. So I think if we can define it better with all of those things taken into account on the CDC level. So let's change the definition of what's included. What are the clinical criteria for a mold-related illness diagnosis to include chronic inflammatory response syndrome, to include the spores, to include fragment exposure. Fragments act a lot like asbestos.
Mhm.
I coin it kind of moldothelioma. It can cause a mesothelial irritation in the body when you have fragments in your lungs. And then let's include all the chemicals, the actinomycetes, the endotoxins, the mycotoxins, the MPA. That's a much bigger definition, and that's a lot harder because we don't have human data. So let's hope we're working on that.
Yeah.
That's
And
what, so I want the definition upgrade to happen.
yeah, I think that would help a lot of people because I think people also limit it to it's just an allergy.
Right.
And it really is so much more than that. And you bring up an interesting point about mold fragments too. I don't think the last research I read on it was that the fragment count is 200 to 500 times higher than the spore count, which
Yep.
is crazy. And that is, even smaller than, some of your air filters can handle, and they can really
Yep.
bypass your body's natural defense mechanisms, make it way into your body. And so it's really something to be aware of. Now,
Yeah.
I know you've heard this before because I've heard it before and I hear it all the time. People will say, mold is everywhere. It's been around forever. It can't be that big of a deal. What do you say to those people?
It is everywhere. We have dealt with it our whole lives in a connected, natural way. When mold is outside, it has its natural forces keeping it behaving well. Remember, mycotoxins are very expensive for mold, so it doesn't want to make a lot of those. So in nature, it's not going to unless it's in a competitive environment, which is a limit of resources or a gluttony of resources without the other natural forces. But outdoors, it has air movement, which we don't have indoors very much. It has UV light, which we don't have indoors. It has critters that like to drink water, so you don't see standing water. And then where you do see standing water, there's this whole mycelial network, a little homage to Paul Stamets and his work with the fungi perfecti group. This mycelial network is the supreme intelligence that is telling all of the creatures, the trees, the soil microorganisms, everybody knows then how to work in a commensal way, to work together for nature, not against nature. We bring mold inside, it doesn't have any of those forces, and we do excess humidity, so we water it. Then it doesn't take a flood, it just takes increased humidity.
Right.
We have stagnation, we have overstuffed closets, overcluttered homes. We have tons of previously living organic material, which is its favorite food. We have no sunlight, no air movement. It's going to see this as lakefront property and start acting out of its natural cycle because it's out of nature. It doesn't have that mycelial network underneath everything giving it the wisdom.
Yeah, and our homes today are so much tighter too. And so it just, we're not even talking about mold at that point. You can have your VOCs or, formaldehyde or whatever else, and it's trapping all of that indoors. Now, sometimes people ask, will a previous mold exposure still impact me today? Like, is that possible if I was exposed in a job previously? What's going on there?
It definitely can. What we see in occupational studies is that it's a coin flip 50-50. You're either on the heads or the tail side of that when people get out of their sick environment at work, if their symptoms go away when they get out of that environment, those were the people that didn't have long-lasting symptoms. 50% of the people, they go home for the weekend, they come back on Monday and they're still symptomatic. Those people become colonized, and those people have long-lasting symptoms that involve more than just respiratory. These are symptoms that kind of go along with sick building syndrome that kind of got a, kind of like chronic fatigue syndrome, in conventional medicine, they're like, oh, sick building, or whatever. Like, get over it, take some Claritin, and you're going to be fine. That's not the case. When you're colonized now, your immune system has been ratcheted down, and your body has a harder time defending its barriers. And that's where we can see some of the things that Dr. Shoemaker pioneered, things like a reduced MSH, which is a barrier hormone. We can see mast cells getting recruited, which is a barrier immune system cell. So if you're colonized, that gets ratcheted down and down and down and down. And over time, then we get the things you're talking about, Lyme reactivation, Epstein-Barr virus reactivation, and a host of other things. Yeah.
Yeah, so that like colonization, moving out of the environment isn't going to fix it, right? You
Right.
kind of need medical treatment, which is a good segue into then my next question is, what are some basic tests that practitioners can run?
The visual contrast sensitivity is the easiest, cheapest way to go. And it's a nice one if someone is either mold affected, even in a past, and or it helps us answer the question, are you being exposed right now? Because when people get moved to like a hotel for their remediation, a lot of hotels are really moldy. And so if your VCS test got worse when you left, we have some concern about where your insurance put you up at. So a VCS is the easiest. That's a visual contrast sensitivity test. I like vcstest.com because the results are a little easier to understand. And they have an annual subscription. So if you are in that whole like moving from place to place situation or remediating and did it really work, and you can be testing yourself repeatedly so you can see if your visual contrast sensitivity has gotten worse or better. We want your body to be able to sense that contrast very well. And so this is a test that the most important thing about this test is to calibrate your computer screen or your iPad or whatever you're using to take the test. Take the time to calibrate it very well because you want a good result. If you're paying $15 for a test, you want a good result. Right. The rest gets a little more technical because it's going to match what the question you're trying to ask as a practitioner. If you have a patient who you're trying to prove a mold diagnosis, remember that things like mycotoxin testing, mold allergy testing, mycotoxin antibody testing, these are all the ways that it can be done, but they're all answering a little bit different question, and no single test is going to be diagnostic. So there's data points. So those are some of the ways I can talk about them. The other one on the market that answers the question of if am I being exposed right now is the serum or blood antibody mycotoxin. This is different than a mold allergy test, which those are very helpful, but those only tell you if you're exposed to spores. That won't answer the question, are you being exposed to mycotoxins? So if all the spores are trapped behind building material and you can't smell anything in your house, but you think it might be mold illness, you could be colonized from a past, but you also could be being exposed to mycotoxins and chemicals coming through that building material and into the air. So that mycotoxin antibody test through MyMycoLab, they have an IgE number that if it's positive, you've been exposed to an appreciable amount that your body is upset about it in the past 2 to 4 weeks.
Oh,
it's
wow.
a great way to test that. Now, if we're trying to answer the question, like how long has this been going on? How much of a body burden do we have? That's where I love the urine mycotoxin testing. And ideally, we would do all 3 of these. Well, 4. We do visual contrast sensitivity, mold allergy, mold spore allergy, mycotoxin antibody, urine mycotoxin. That is a complete picture. So any one of those is just a data point and not really answering the full. But if you see mycotoxins, you know your body's being affected. Everyone is, you go back to the family thing, everyone is affected by mycotoxins. If we weren't, militaries around the world wouldn't be stockpiling them for biowarfare.
Yeah, they're poisonous.
Everybody is affected. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It just may show itself differently. I think that's the frustrating part too. It's not like a pregnancy test, right? You want just one test, just give me the answer, and it doesn't work like that. And then it's also complicated. This gets into my second question. There also just isn't one, you can't just take one pill and you're good. Now we know that we advocate to change the air. You really want to be in as clean a possible environment as possible, whether that means remediating correctly or moving, if that's the step that makes the most sense. But what are the basic components of treatment, just high level, because I know it can get complex?
Sure. And I'll just back up on the diagnostics. I have a questionnaire. We're working to scientifically validate this. Dr. Neil Nathan and I are launching a project right now with doctors who specialize in mold to validate whether the numbering system on that, the scoring system, actually correlates to lab testing, so that we can, for people that either don't have access to testing or they want to track how they're doing, they can use the questionnaire. That's what I use it for in practice, is diagnostic, but also tracking, because it is really helpful for people to see, wow, I had migraines. I kind of forgot about that. Like that, you can get really, really sick with mold, and you can get very brain fogged and forget it.
Yeah. And having been through the brain fog, I don't remember what I had for dinner yesterday. So, then thinking about your symptoms, it's easy. Where can someone find that quiz?
Yeah, that's on my website for free. So It's also in my book, but you can download the PDF, printable PDF, and then just make sure you date it, because that's what a lot of people forget to do that. And then they're like, oh, when was this? You know, so I think it's really good for just tracking your whole story on paper.
And we'll link to your website for this interview at the end so that people can get to that pretty quickly.
Perfect. Yeah. So treatment wise, where we heal by peeling an onion, that's the way we heal. A therapeutic order is peeling the orange. When I sat down to write my book, I was like, oh, I guess I kind of have a system here. You know, how can I make it simple for people and put in 5 simple steps? And when we look at those 5 steps, it was like, oh, it isn't a pyramid. It's sort of like peeling an orange, because the first 2 need to be done as close to 100% as possible, which is just how you would eat an orange. You'd peel that outer orange layer, the white fluffy layer, and then the inside, you just pick and choose the sections that fit for you. A lot of people, when they peel the outer 2 layers, are better. Going back to that coin flip thing, you know, not everybody gets as sick from mold as the sensitive people. So there might just be peeling that outer 2 layer and then do 1 section, and your body is like, whoop, I'm done. You know, I'm rebounding. My immune system is taking back its control, and we're kicking fungus out. So the 5 that I kind of break down is, this is just my approach. There's lots of ways to do this. So this, you know, every doctor attracts their patients that align with them. So every doctor is going to have a little different way. But this is the 5 steps: is avoidance, fundamentals, protect, repair, and fight. And the reason I put them in that order, avoidance is number 1. Like you said, the indoor air is critical. It's nearly impossible to get better from mold illness if you're still in mold. Although if people are in a place where they can't get out quite yet, either their work is moving them to a new building, or they're remediating or something like that, or they're in a rental situation, it's going to be a few months. I do have a course called 9 Things to Know While You're Still in Mold, so that people know there are some things that could make you a little sicker while you're trying to get better. So not everything in my book applies if you're in that situation. I mean, it applies, but you have to be kind of careful about when. So we have avoidance, and Dr. Krinian nailed in my head the first 3 steps of any toxic illness is number 1, avoidance, number 2, avoidance, number 3, avoidance. Because it's that important. So the avoidance piece is huge. And again, a lot of times 50% of the people get out of the mold and they're fine. They don't need any treatment. Fundamentals, like basic, you know, clean living stuff. It's the diet, it's the sleep. And I do have some diet recommendations that people to get off mold promoting foods, fungi promoting foods, or mycotoxin laden foods. It's just sending that message. Fungi is moving in. So if you're eating mushrooms, if you're eating yeast, if you're eating medicinal mushrooms, that's just reinforcing that message, and your body is going to feel overwhelmed and feel defensive. So then protect has to do with the fact that when mold dies, if you have to actually go to the fight stage, it gets mean while it dies. So as we give antifungals to like an aspergillus, it starts to kick up its production of mycotoxins. So we try to get the brain and nervous system protected, organs of elimination and detoxification protected, cardiovascular system, get everything kind of like ready. And then hopefully repair some of the damage that's been done in step 4. And then we can add the fight phase, which is antifungals. And in my experience, but this is my patient base, the majority of my patients need antifungals, both sinus and whole body.
Yeah. No, I appreciate like this perspective, because when you have, and I love this about your book, you're overwhelmed and you have brain fog, and you kind of prioritize and you lay it out in order, and you make it easy for people, because it can seem very overwhelming. You're trying to take care of your living situation. You don't feel good. You're trying to get yourself better. And this kind of leads into my next question. I think for me personally, I had to fight for answers for my family. I was the one staying up late, going to the Facebook groups. I was the one connecting all the dots. And I had to look to functional integrative medicine to start finding answers for my family. But generally speaking, in your opinion, why do you think that mold-related illness, and I shouldn't use that term because I know it needs an upgrade.
No, I like the term. It just needs a better definition. Yeah, right.
Why do you think it's so often misdiagnosed?
We don't have the human studies. And it makes sense when we think about medical ethics. We can't purposefully expose someone to a known carcinogen, a known toxin, a toxin that causes birth defects. We can't do that on purpose just to figure out what makes it better, because what makes it better is don't get exposed to the toxin.
Right.
So they can't create that study. And so when we're in a place in medicine, conventional medicine is evidence-based medicine. There's no empirical learning. Case reviews are kind of like, well, that's interesting. They kind of get blown off, and we're in this whole randomized clinical control, double blind,
Right.
world. Who's going to recruit for that study? Okay, who's going to sign up for that?
Right.
We're going to expose you to something that's going to ruin your immune system, be a carcinogenic, maybe cause birth defects, maybe even have, which we see this in animals, have epigenetic effects, which is not only will it affect your kids, it's actually going to affect your kids' kids more than your kids. Like, who's going to sign up for that? Nobody's going to sign up for that. So we have to do translational research from animal studies. Not every animal, what works for every animal doesn't necessarily always work for a human, but thankfully I had enough experience with a lot of these natural things that I could make the sense of like, does this make sense biochemically in a human? Things like milk thistle, things like turmeric, like quercetin, resveratrol, fish oil, these are all things that they're adding. The biggest one is bioflavonoids. They're adding bioflavonoids to animal feed to protect them from moldy feed and moldy barns, moldy living situations, not just feed. So that's why we're in this place. And that's where I'm really trying to, again, Dr. Neil Nathan and I were working to just try to validate this whole thing through data collection. And if anyone has research dollars, I have an idea for a study of people who are voluntarily exposing themselves. The heroes of our mold world, they're voluntarily exposing themselves to mycotoxins, which is remediators.
Yeah.
They're out there every day. Mycotoxins go through those respirators. And so we could be doing, age and gender matched controlled studies and doing some interventions and see what helps protect these guys. And
Well,
yes,
you mentioned that to the right person, because at Change There, we are going to be funding and conducting research and analyzing. So we should talk after this about
it. Okay. I love that, because it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We could totally do this study.
And I think too, so you have that human factor, right? The ethical piece. And then you tie it into something that we talk about a lot, and Brian Carr and Corey Levy and Michael Rubino too, are all part of the foundation, is that in our homes, a lot of these places that mold is found, they're out of sight, out of mind places. So it's not places that you're not going to always see or smell mold, right? The number of people who I talked to where it was hidden in an attic or in a crawl space or HVAC or behind a wall. And so it's not top of mind for the homeowner or renter either. So it really seems like there are so many forces that make a diagnosis sometimes hard. And I think it explains why it takes people so long to get to the right answer. They go through a lot of fibromyalgia, or you have this, and we'll be sharing some stories through the foundation of that people have experienced. And once they got to the root cause, which turned out to be their home, the body began to heal itself. And it really, it's connecting those dots. Now, you said before, that healing from illness is different from healing from acute illness like a cold or something. Can you elaborate on that? Because people want to know at the end of the day, how long is it going to take before I feel better?
Yeah, it's very different. And in my experience, people take about 3 to 6 months for the symptoms to get loud enough or in multitude enough for them to show up and say, this might be mold, so you can be in that environment for 3 to 6 months and not have any symptoms. That's why it's also hard to find, because it's like your body handles it for a little while until it can't. And how long then depends on how many times you've been exposed, what molds were you exposed to, how much, and it's not abnormal to take 2 years to be done with this story with your health. And that's hard to hear when you're in the middle of it, but you don't feel this bad for the whole 2 years. But it takes that long to get it where you're like, boom, okay, I can be off all my support and nothing comes back. So I lost track of your question because I got into the how long.
Oh, yeah, no, just because I think people,
Acute chronic. There we go.
yeah. And knowing that like healing is not a straight line. You've talked about that, other practitioners. I've experienced that in my own journey. Sometimes, you take a few steps forward and then it's a step back and you get kind of bummed or defeated, and you have to like hang on to that hope, and you have to just pay attention to your body, readjust.
Yeah. And you don't get to just lay on the couch until you feel better. That's the acute illness thing. It's like, that's when you need to fast, rest, drink a lot of water. You get to like watch a movie or something until you feel better. Chronic illness is not the same way. Chronic illness requires daily willpower and pushing yourself, finding your, whatever that inner strength is, whether it's, if you're religious or spiritual or meditator or whatever, like there is something that has to be in the inside of you that says, I want to fight for my health.
Mm-hmm.
That's key. And if anyone's having trouble with that, or if you're the person who keeps finding moldy environments, you sell your house and you move into a house that looked fine, but it's moldy, or you got into an apartment and it's moldy, or your insurance sends you to a hotel and it's moldy. They send you in a new one and it's moldy, and you send in a new one. This has now mold. You and mold are way too much on the same frequency. And if you're in that coherence with mold, this is energetic now. I have a guided visualization. I put all my woo-woo witchy stuff in there. And it's only 11 minutes, and you can listen to this and get off mold's vibe. You have to tune your radio a little higher, your inner radio. When you can change that inner thing, that helps you realize, this is a chronic illness. I don't get to just lay around till I feel better. I've got to fight, and I want to find my fight. And if you're in that situation, you can't find your fight, please, it's absolutely free. It's on my website. I did it as a gift because I'm trying to help people get off that coherence.
I love that. You have so many great resources between your books, which we'll talk about at the end, and your website. And so we'll definitely tell people how to get in touch with you. I think to add to what you said too, like for our journey started because of our children. And I think like many parents, you'd move mountains for your kids, and I put my health on the back burner. And it got to the point where the doctor said to me, like, you need to start prioritizing yourself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're out there and you are taking care of someone in your home who maybe has the most severe symptoms, right? That's where your time and attention is going. Make sure you take time to take care of yourself and make that commitment too. That's our little PSA.
As parents, as mamas, we're really, really good at that, unfortunately.
You take care of everyone else first, and then you sometimes whatever is left over, and sometimes you have to be like, nope, I need to do this for me because it's important. Mm-hmm. Now, we kind of touched on this, but I just want to reiterate it. And it's a simple question with a complex answer. Can you heal in a home with mold?
Not well, no.
Yeah. You heard it straight from Dr. Jill.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. I know people want to just put in that air purifier, and that is a Band-Aid, but it's not going to get you to where you need to be.
Right. If you've already been made sick from it, and that we've known from occupational studies, if you're already having symptoms and you get out of the environment, you still have symptoms, you cannot get better in that environment.
Yep. Yeah. And we're going to have resources on our website too about how to do that, right? The right way to go about inspecting and remediating. So changetheairfoundation.org, lots of resources. We're always building it out to help you with that piece too. Now, what are some things that people can do while stuck in mold? You mentioned your course, which I love. Are there a couple tidbits from there that you could share with us?
Sure. I mean, you said air filtration. Obviously, the more you can reduce that exposure, the better. You can also do using essential oils. I use them on little cotton balls. If you know where your moldy area is. So in some situations, they might be in a condo situation, and the HOA doesn't let them repair the roof until they repair all the roofs. And so there's this delay time that can happen. Or in rental situations, if you know where the moldy area is, you can take essential oils. And I have a list of them in my book, but I also have the list on YouTube on my DIY essential oil nasal spray. All of those essential oils work to not only kill mold, but to reduce their ability to make mycotoxins to defend themselves. So you can use these cotton balls. You have to oil them every so often because they do lose their scent. But if it's like a bathroom and you know it's a problematic bathroom, you can shove these essential oil cotton balls everywhere, seal off the bathroom, and that room is going to be less off-gassy than when you go into it and remediate, and you're not going to get as much, mycotoxin air exchanging with the house. So reducing it, the mycotoxins and the actinomycetes, all of the gaseous types of things with air filtration, but also shutting down mold's ability to continue to grow with essential oils. I really hesitate using essential oil sprays because that's just adding more water to the problem. So that's where it's nice to use the little cotton balls, and you can shove them under, if it's under a cabinet, you can shove them in there, put it in the closet, you can put it, into your roof. You can use all kinds of different things to try to shut the mold down and start to tell the message, not only are you not welcome here, but we're also going to impair your ability to make toxins so that we don't get more poisoned. And then the big thing would be a low mold, high binder diet. Diet is a superpower intervention for mold. Superpower. So getting things that are low in fungal count. So we kind of went through that: yeast, nothing that's in the fungal family, just therapeutically. This is not a lifetime diet. This is a therapeutic diet. And things that help grow more yeast overgrowth. So that would be getting rid of sweets, simple sugars, fruit juice. Nobody needs to be drinking fruit juice. It's like insta sugar. And then, sodas and things like that are sugar. That's going to help the yeast grow. Baked goodies, those kinds of things. So if you're really craving sweets, you can use, oh my gosh, I'm losing MCTs. What is that? Medium chain triglycerides. So like coconut oil. That is great for a mold sick person to stop a craving. Those feed the body what it thinks it's needing. So it answers all the little receptors. And then you don't have to have the carbohydrate that's actually going to grow the yeast. And a lot of medium chain triglycerides come from antifungal sources, so like coconut. So if you can try to get yourself finding some of those little things so that you can get off the things that are going to cause yeast overgrowth. Yeast and molds are different, but they're all in the fungal family. And a lot of people with mold illness end up having yeast overgrowth. Yeast can make their own mycotoxin, and that affects how your brain functions. Causes a lot of anxiety, causes a lot of brain fog, a lot of despair. So here you are facing all these big decisions. And if you have yeast in your gut, you have yeast on your mind. And if it's in your mind, everything's going to seem way more overwhelming, way bigger than it actually is. And this is a big deal. Can you imagine? Now we add despair on top of that. The other part of the low mold, high binder diet is low mycotoxins. So we know that certain things like grains, certain coffees, whatever you're having on a regular basis, make sure that you're having good quality sources grown from small growers. So there's not a lot of sitting around in storage. So grains, corn, peanuts, soy, potatoes, those are all things that kind of, if they sit around too long, are going to be really problematic. So just that simple thing. And then eating 5 to 7 servings of veggies, trying to get a lot of green, leafy greens in there, a little bit of bitter like arugula. That's going to help with all the bioflavonoid part. Every color of the rainbow of a vegetable helps mold mycotoxins in different ways. I've found research on every single one. Animal research.
Well, and I love that. That's something you can start doing today, right? And be more conscious about the food that you're picking, and you can, I love that. It's something that, we all have control over in a situation.
Totally.
Sometimes you feel like you don't have a control over a lot of things, especially if you're running or a condo or some of those other situations or finances. It can feel limiting, but you can control that part. Now, this is my favorite question to ask. So what are some things that you personally do to keep you and your family healthy and safe?
Outside every day. Outside and movement. Those are some really key things. We've lost the connection with nature. And that there are so many things, just like mold doesn't act well if it's not connected. Neither do we. We don't sleep. We don't have joy. We don't have community. People lose hope, and your body systems don't run correctly if you are not in touch with nature. So nature would be my biggest one, nature and movement.
And when you're not feeling well, the last thing you sometimes think about doing is going outside and going for a walk, but it can make the biggest difference.
Yep. And if you're bedbound, I mean, I have patients who are, get near the window and get fresh air.
Yeah.
You know,
That
bundle up if you're too cold or whatever. You know, nature is so important. So daily appreciation in nature. There's lots of research about what it does for your immune system. The very cells that mold impairs, appreciation of nature, called forest bathing or Shinrin Yoku, this boosts that very cell. So it isn't just a cute recommendation, you know, oh, that's sweet, get outside, yeah, you know, no, it's serious.
Yeah, it can make a difference. Now, to wrap it up here, we kind of talked on it, but can you sum it up for us? If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do that? And before you answer that question, I want to say congratulations, because you have a new book out. Do you want to tell us the title of your new book? I mean, it literally just dropped, right?
Today. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's called A Light in the Dark for Pandas and Pans. It's for parents who are working with children who have pandas and pans. And a lot like my mold book, I tried to make the concepts extremely simple and the interventions very guided with dosages. All the doses are given in adult, but I give you how to calculate it, change that calculation for your child based on their weight. There's a medication compatibility chart. People can go to my website and find that. And that is, you know, the typical meds that are given for kids with pandas and pans and the typical supplements and which ones play nice. So you don't have to worry, because a lot of parents, this is their first foray into the wild, wild world of functional medicine, because they all of a sudden end up with a sick kid and their conventional doc is like, we're doing what we can, but we don't really understand this condition yet. And they don't have fantastic tools. When we marry the natural medicine and the conventional medicine, that works perfectly. So this gives people a little more confidence in using some of those things.
Yeah, so you have both your books, you have a website, you're active on Facebook. We're going to put some of those links below. Dr. Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to, hopefully we can talk more. And you continue to just be a wealth of information for so many people out there who need it. And as someone who needed things broken down in a simple way, an overwhelmed mother, I want to say thank you, because we really are our own best advocates.
Yes.
So for anyone listening, please head on over to changetheairfoundation.org if you like what you heard today, and be sure to sign up for our newsletter, because it's the best way to get great interviews and information and tips like this directly to your inbox. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.